Hello all, my name is Julia Lemus and you guys are watching Reading Shades. Today I would like to share with you guys a short story titled 1955 by Alice Walker and discuss the important history of segregation and the civil rights movement that went along with the timeline of the story. But first, let's dive into a brief introduction of our author. Born in February of 1944 in Edenton, Georgia, Alice Walker is an American novelist that is also known for her work in short stories, poems, and social activism. As a child of African descent, Alice grew under a time of tension. She saw her parents suffer under the very system she was born under, known as the Jim Crow laws. It was during her adolescence when a movement had started known as the Civil Rights Movement. It was established as a peaceful way to protest the Jim Crow laws. This movement increased drastically within time. As Walker grew older, she became a part of the Civil Rights Movement. Her activism seeped into her writing, making both her biggest strengths. Most of her work emphasizes on the struggles of Black people, mostly women, and their lives in a racist and sexist society. Some of her other well-known work also include The Color Purple, Everyday Use, and The Third Life of Grange Copeland. "1955 takes place in, of course, 1955, or at least that's where it begins, and it continues well into the 70s. The setting is very important as this was during the time that the Jim Crow laws were under effect. People of color weren't allowed to go to the same restaurants or schools as whites. They were forced to give up their seats on public transportation for whites, and they weren't even allowed to use the same restrooms or water fountains. Complete segregation. A fun fact, 1955 is actually when the Civil Rights Movement had officially begun. We see a lot of historical faces and events during this time period. Here are some examples. Rosa Parks refuses to give up her bus seat for a white man and is arrested in Montgomery, Alabama, 1955, thus beginning the Montgomery bus boycott. Martin Luther King gives his famous I Have a Dream speech at the Washington, D.C. March in front of 20,000 people in 1963. Malcolm X founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity with the goal to promote the human rights of Afro-Americans in 1964. All form of segregation was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court under Chief of Justice Earl Warren in 1968. Although there were a lot of milestones in this era, the violence and discrimination against people of color still persisted, and it continued in big and subtle ways. And we will explore some of these in our story. But first, let's get into our characters. In this story, we follow two main characters, Gracie May Still and Traynor. Gracie May is a Black, heavy-set, middle-aged woman who is heavily based on Willie Mae Thornton, who's an American blues singer and songwriter. Willie Mae Thornton was the original singer and writer of the song Hound Dog that ultimately got Elvis famous after he had bought and covered it from her. Traynor, the second main character, is based on no one else but Elvis. He's described to be 5'9", womanish looking, with real dark white skin and a red, pouting mouth. He has black curly hair and looks like Louisiana Creole. Gracie's words, not mine. Walker doesn't hide the resemblance between the characters and their real-life personas. Other smaller characters include JT and Horace, which are Gracie's first and second husband, and the Deacon, which is Traynor's manager and also is described to look like Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, with his white hair and gray eyes. So 1955 begins when Gracie May gets a visit from Traynor and the Deacon. We can already see subtle examples of segregation when Gracie states, "They are white, and I wonder what in the world they doing in this neighborhood." Housing was another form of segregation. Predominantly black and predominantly white communities were common. It was odd to see a white person casually visit a black neighborhood. So Gracie May is offered $500 for her song, more than she's ever made from it, and takes the deal. It's 1956 and Traynor goes off to sing Gracie May's song on TV, looking half asleep from the neck up, but kinda awake in a nasty way from the waist down. And he gets famous fast. He's later recognized as the Emperor of Rock and Roll. 1957, Traynor visits Gracie during Christmas time. This is where we see another hint of the effect of segregation. This being on a social level, when Gracie states, JT ain't never in his life been able to act decent to a white man he wasn't working for. This is also when Traynor surprises her with the first of many presents he gives her throughout the story, it being a white Cadillac. One can even say that these many gifts symbolize the guilt Traynor had about all the fame and money he received over Gracie's song, not thinking himself worthy of his success. The guilt must have been very deep, as he also gives her a mink, self-cleaning oven, an automatic power drill, and even a farm. Flash forward to 1968. Gracie hadn't seen Traynor for 7 years, but one day, out of the blue, he visits her and invites her to dinner at his mansion. During their dinner, Traynor states, "They want what you got, but they don't want you. They want what I got, only it ain't mine. That's what makes them so hungry for me when I sing. They're getting the flavor of something, but they're not getting the thing itself," when talking about his fans. This is important as towards the end, Gracie May and Traynor are on The Carson Show, singing the song that gave him his fame. Gracie May gets an underwhelming applause, but Traynor, singing just like her, gets praised like always. This bothers him, but not Gracie, showing how used to the treatment she is by the public, and ultimately showing that it wasn't the music from people of color that society didn't like, it was the person themselves. One thing I didn't mention that is mentioned in the story quite frequently is how obsessed Traynor's fans are over him. He is probably the most famous person in the world at the time. I mean, he was technically Elvis. He is constantly surrounded by people, yet he is extremely lonely and clearly depressed. Thank you all for joining me today on analyzing Allison Walker's short story titled 1955. I hope, like myself, you all learned something new. For example, one thing I learned is that an author's life experience can definitely be an influence on their writing. Till next time.